Welcome to the CU Tri Show. My name is Karen Sims, and I'm with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative. And we are super excited that you joined us today. I am deeply honored to have Dr. Nathan Stevens with me. But before we get going, I'm going to just add the disclaimer. The views and the opinions of our guests are their own, and we're able to do this show thanks to the generous support of Urbana Public TV, the Champaign County Mental Health Board, and the Champaign County Community Coalition. And we hope that this elevates conversations about trauma and resiliency and moves as a part of our movement to make Champaign County a trauma and justice informed community. So without further ado, Dr. Stevens, please introduce yourself.
Well, actually, you've done a good job of that. I'm Dr. Nathan Stevens. I'm an assistant professor in social work at Illinois State University, and it's a privilege and honor to be here today.
Wonderful. So I don't know if how much people know about you. I've had the privilege of, sort of getting to know you a little bit better, thanks to serving on a panel, and have kind of followed you since, you were at the Bruce Nesbitt Center. But tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what about this topic sort of called to you.
Yeah, originally from Columbia, Missouri. I was raised by a single mother in public housing, and my mother eventually became addicted to drugs, to crack cocaine, and that was the time in the late 80s, early 90s in central Missouri. It had already devastated the West Coast, but as it began making its trajectory inward, it decimated, many communities across America with mass incarceration and those type of things, and basically gutted communities from the resources in terms of the elders and the mentors and folks like that who were able to provide guidance. And so all of a sudden we see a lot of drug dealing and violence and gang membership and these type of things creeping up. Basically, it ebbed out a lot of the resources and things in communities such as Champaign-Urbana, as well as Columbia, Missouri. And so from that, I was able to go to Lincoln University, which is the HBCU in Missouri, had a somewhat successful first semester, and came home to a debilitated household, ended up, getting in some legal trouble, trying to help out financially. Ultimately moved to Oklahoma, stayed there for a little bit of time, got in some trouble down there, and then returned to Missouri in 2000, where I finished up my BSW in social work at Columbia College. I finished my MSW in social work at University of Missouri. And just last week, I finished my PhD in ed leadership and policy analysis. And so, but the thing that draws me to this topic is having seen the devastations and things that occurred not only around me, but also within me. And so the impact of various systems, policies, and procedures and protocols, and the impact that they had on me individually, and navigating through various bureaucracies and institutions, experiencing institutional racism and white supremacy, how it traumatized me, because at that time I didn't have language for it. And I remember learning from former colleagues about critical race theory, and they were talking about white supremacy and things like this. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you're talking about people with Klan hats on and stuff like that, pretty much like what you see on certain conservative news channels today, right? About what CRT is. And then it wasn't until I experienced it, and it was like, okay, no, this person isn't wearing a Klan hat or a hood or sheets, but their impact and the threat that I felt from their actions and their words was no less smaller than had someone lit a burning cross out in front of my house. My concern for myself and my livelihood and ability to provide for my family. And so that kind of gets into what drove me to be interested in how various systems impact Black men and boys, and what that impact has on them, from K through 12 to K through 20, really, the prison industrial complex, what I call the nonprofit industrial complex, and other system, political, economic, and more. So.
All right. So you said a whole bunch right. And so I want to kind of go back and unpack a couple of things.
Okay.
And one of those things is sort of, you did sort of an arc. You said, hey, this happened. I had some trouble. I had this dislocation. And then but you didn't talk a little bit, because I think sometimes particularly for people who are even allied, or for people who are like in neighborhoods who have been impacted by stress and adversity, they don't know how you went from I had a little bit of trouble to BSW. Can you talk a little bit about those sort of resiliency factors, those protective factors, both internal and external, that might have provided some leverage to help you make that journey?
Absolutely. First of all, and I don't want to sound religious or overly religious, but I had a praying grandmother, first and foremost. But the other thing is there were things that were done that provided, as you just said, some internal resiliency, right? So when I look at where I ended up versus my siblings, I had a older brother, older sister, and a younger brother. My mother sent me to special preschools that were sponsored by local universities, hint, 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 right? To give children those foundational building blocks that were essential to their success. So I went to one that was sponsored by a small college back in Missouri called Stevens College, which was primarily a women's college, and then one sponsored by the University of Missouri. Wow. And during that time, it planted the seed within me that, hey, kid, you're pretty smart. You have the ability to learn. You have the ability to use this to navigate various situations, right? And so once that seed was planted and was, fertilized, if you would, by getting awards and things in school and stuff like that, that was like, okay, this is something that you kind of have going on. And I also say that I wasn't I have come from an athletic family, right? I have uncles who are like Hall of Fame in terms of local high school and stuff like that. I wasn't that good. I was more like third string. So, but what that did is it caused me to kind of find my niche, right? I can't do that as well, but what can I do? And so that kind of became that internal resiliency, is understanding what am I good at, that I can use to kind of chart my path. And so that actually was something that I used to kind of recuperate from when I got into some legal trouble, is how do I bounce back from that? And what skills, what talents, what gifts, et cetera, do I have? And I've always had the ability to learn. And so, and ability to kind of communicate. And I've said before, I can go from the boardroom to the back room and pretty much have an understanding in both places. And so I think that comes from education, right? And so that enabled me to navigate spaces kind of differently than most of my peers and family members who were more athletic, right? And so that's kind of that arc and how I was able to kind of have some resiliency. And what I found, Karen, is that when people see that, and so oftentimes when I tell people who've coming home from incarceration, et cetera, you can be as smart as me, but I don't have to prove how smart I am. I can just show you the plaque on the wall, right? Yeah. And so it's those credentials, it's using those systems, right, to kind of advocate, it's playing the game, so to speak, right? But not everyone is comfortable and not everyone is able to survive those systems and come out unscathed, so to speak. And so I think that's important to remember. And again, that's why my research looks at what is the impact that these various systems have on individuals, particularly Black men, because if you look from preschool to grad school, Black males are, falling behind in terms of achievement. But are we saying that they're just unable to learn and to grow? It can't be that way. So what is it about these particular institutions and these cultures that serve as barriers for Black males and Black men and boys? And so that's kind of what I look at is and one, having experienced it, and one is this notion of authenticity, of being frank and forthcoming and speaking and having an opinion, and not being docile, not being submissive, but being kind of firm in my resolve. That serves as a threat, which speaks to racial tropes and stereotypes. And so Black men have to navigate this world in a different way as a result of some of that.
So, again, right, like lovely, but I want to make sure folks hear, because I think that it's important. So, because it's based on the research and data. When people wonder, like, what do we need to do? What do Black men and boys who particularly have been impacted by structural violence or structural inequities need? And right, one of the first things you said, and this is what the data says, is extended family network and bridges to support. And we need to acknowledge that frequently that there are those extended family networks. And so don't assume that every family that is experiencing adversity doesn't have someone in the village that could be leaning into. Right? We know that spiritual support makes a difference. And again, it is not us being evangelical, but it is sort of acknowledging that there is something about that gives hope. I've been in a lot of spaces and places where people talk about a feeling of hopelessness and despair, and spiritual support is that. And I've been thinking, and we'll maybe have room to talk about this a little bit later, but I've been thinking about the institution of the Black church, and not necessarily Black denomination, but I've been thinking about how the rhythmic, the repetitive, the ritual that is done in community provided healing in ways that you can't get. Like, we would have to put you in many, many programs in order for you to get what that experience can do to the body in terms of healing, right?
Absolutely.
So you also mentioned the value of early childhood, and it is why programs like Tracy Dace's Dream program is so invaluable, and about people seeing you and affirming you and believing that you're smart, even if the data doesn't necessarily, is not there in the beginning, but it's just someone saying, I see you, I recognize you, and helping you value learning. And what the research says, right, is that you don't even have to be good at learning. You just have to value the learning process. And that makes a difference. And then people giving you the opportunity to continue to reset, show up, begin again, and believe in your potential, which is what sports can do. Because sometimes we're like, if you're not going to go to the NBA or professional whatever, we think that it doesn't matter. But there is, again, based on the science of resiliency, lots of value in getting your kids into something. I was recently talking to a group of people who were using an assessment tool called the CANS. And I was saying, hey, a talent isn't like I play video games, right? Like, if it's not functional, like if I can't build upon it. So if you're out there, if you're interested in sports and you're reading about it and studying it and playing games, that is something we can build upon. But let's not just sort of, minimize what it takes to sort of fully be. And I loved your articulation, and I just wanted to unpack it because, again, we hear, right, in so many spaces, well, what do we need? And what we need to kids to succeed is those basic core values. What did I miss?
No, you hit it. You hit it on the nail on the head. And one of the things that I love about Tracy Dace's program Dream, and also the Boys and Girls Club under Charles Burton is what Carl Jung talked about is unconditional resolve.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's this notion of I'm not going to love you any less, no matter what you do. Right. And that's not a blank check to go do all kind of ridiculous stuff.
Yeah.
That's what it says is, though, when you are human, as we all are, I'm still going to love you. I'm gonna welcome you back to the fold. We're going to talk about how you need to be accountable. We're going to talk about what you learned from this and the harm that you caused, etc. And we're going to move forward, right? We're going to grow and learn from this together as a community. And so that is what the Black church, provide historically and in many contemporary. That is what programs like Dream and Boys and Girls Club provides. That is what, and other programs. I know Stephanie Cockrell provides that program for young women in the community, but we need it in our schools as well. And I know we have this notion of restorative justice, right, which is very akin to it. But restorative justice is a little bit different in that if I know that, Karen believes in me, and I'll just say this, just a true story. When I got hired at ISU, I didn't have my PhD yet, right? And I was given that opportunity.
Yeah.
But when I completed it, I told the person who hired me, I had you in mind, and I felt like I had to do it because you gave me a chance, right? I wanted to prove to you that I was worth the risk that you took from me. Yeah. Right. How many times can we say that the guy who hired me, who helped me at the University of Missouri, I started out as a custodian, and he tells this story. I was his custodian, and I defended my dissertation in the vice chancellor for student affairs' office, right? The office that I used to be a custodian in. But he was someone who believed in me and said, hey, if you need to take off to go to night school up the street, come back and do your job, I'm with you. Yeah. And so he kind of adopted me and took me in. I actually refer to him as my dad because he was that supportive. And I mean, blonde haired, blue eyed white guy. I didn't know him from anybody, but he's from the South Side of Chicago. Mm. Right. So he had an understanding, and he could recognize that person has potential, and I'm going to use some social and political capital to help this person once I found out what it is that they have aspirations to do. And that is so meaningful that someone took a chance on us.
Yeah. Oh, right. I was talking at training last night at the trauma-informed criminal justice system training at Parkland, and we were talking about that. And I think that this is a perfect segue to some of your research. But sometimes we act like a policy is absolute. And when we want to transform systems, sometimes there's discretion around reading and application. And we know that there is that discretion right, the research and data around mentoring and promotion and opportunities says that some people through relationships and social connectedness and privilege get more discretion, more opportunities, more leeway. And if systems want to be more equitable, right, and to give more opportunity, how do we look at that policy on paper and think, am I reading this too narrowly? Where is there latitude? Where is there room? Could there be another interpretation? Or do we need to really go back and dismantle it because there's so many structural barriers that are getting in the way to the kind of work or communities, right, to the kind of place that we're trying to create? So I loved, what a beautiful story.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is that that's actually what I did my research on as far as my dissertation was. I created a program called the Mizzou Black Men's Initiative. And what I found, Karen, is that the guys were coming from St. Louis and Chicago and Kansas City, and they knew what it is they wanted to major in, what it is they wanted to do, et cetera. What I did was I gave them a structure to say, okay, here's your safe space, so to speak, right? Here's your home base. Here's the place where you can come back and get replenished. Here's a place where there's that, again, unconditional resolve, unconditional love. I got on them a lot. I pull your pants up, right? But this is what I told them. I don't want you sagging, not because I'm against sagging for some reason like some folks are. I said, but I understand that people will judge you before they get to know how wonderful you are.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I'm against sagging, is because I know there's some positives, some benefits for you, but others are looking for a reason to discredit you, or that's a fulfillment of a stereotype or negative thought that I had about this particular demographic anyway.
Yeah.
But providing them that safe space, like many of our students receive it, like HBCUs, right? And they flourished, right? Beyond my wildest imagination. It's giving them a space to create. The other thing that I gave them was agency, right? I tell them, I didn't create this program. We created this program. I had a few ideas. I bounced them off of you all. It started with 9 guys. By 3 years, I had over almost 100 guys in the program.
Wow.
We owned it. But many of our bureaucracies and our structures, we have these rules, and to your point, it's so rigid, it's so this, it's so that. Even in my classes at ISU, my students, what do you need to be fully engaged in our discussions and our conversations? My job is to facilitate an educational environment where we can all learn and grow together. My job is not to come in and rip your head off and pour a bunch of knowledge in it. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So.
No. Okay. So I want to bridge something, because you
Sure.
were talking about, and I know some of your work, because this is how we started getting connected, is around Black men and trauma. And I can make that leap, but how is what we've been talking about related to Black men, trauma, and mental health? And then we're going to talk about how is this related to Black men, trauma, and community violence. So let's take this one step at a time, right?
No, absolutely. Well, and think about it. If I'm walking down the street and an officer pulls me over and says, well, you fit the description, right, of someone. And I know, like, dude, I just got off work. I don't fit any description. I know that I haven't done anything because I just got off work, like right over there, right? And so that's viewed a particular way. It's viewed as resistance, or, you're not compliant and these kind of things. And it's no, I'm actually trying to maintain a semblance of agency and get you to believe me. And so I'm operating from a negative perspective. And so then as I'm slammed to the ground, I'm not believed, right? Those types of incidents can cause trauma. And not only law enforcement, we also can traumatize in terms of, educational institutions. Someone threw a wad of paper, the teacher says, Nathan, go pick that piece of paper up. And I say, hey, Miss Karen, it wasn't me. And then you say, yeah, it was, because you wearing those Air Jordans, right? And, and so now I feel like I'm being punished for something I didn't do. And these are the kind of things that Black men have on a regular basis that they experience. And while it occurs in all groups, it occurs disproportionately to Black men and boys, right? The school to prison pipeline, the suspensions and expulsions, right? All of these types of things lead to feeling like I'm less than. And so, one of the things that I talk to people about related to Black men is that we have to get them to believe in themselves. Someone has to believe in you, because society believes in you only to a certain extent. And so one of the things that I looked at is, we value Black men in terms of, can you throw a football? Can you dunk a basketball? Can you sing, right? Can you dance? We rarely say, wow, that was really intellectual. That was smart. You created this science project, or you did these kind of things. So society sends a message to Black men, and I mean all of society, we don't necessarily value your education, right? And so what happens is, I'm trying to be valued, I'm trying to be loved. So okay, I'm gonna quit this school thing, Miss Karen, and I'm gonna start rapping, because that's what society says, it can make some money off my ability to rap. And if that's not being successful, if I'm not successful in the things that society seems to value, then I have to create another form or another alternative route to success, right? And so sometimes that can become selling drugs or doing something like that, an alternative avenue to what I may perceive to be success. And so there's a whole bunch of conversations we can have about that. But ultimately, it depends on the value, Black men feel that they receive from an institution or agents of an institution. And an institution can also be our churches and our communities as well. How do we demonstrate the value and the traumatic experiences? One of the things that we have to get better at is most men, but particularly Black men and boys, we are not taught how to feel. Right? I went to a workshop a few months ago in the summer, and someone asks me, how do you know that you're loved? How does it feel? How do you know that you're loved? How do you know that you're valued? And I'm thinking, wow, when you're not used to getting affirmed, I have to think about that, right? And so I think disproportionately, this is a group that a lot of times Black men, we're hyper vigilant as a result of the traumas that we experience. And I mean, honestly, just quite frankly, I'm still having a hard time celebrating last Friday. Wow. I get happy because people around me are happy, but people ask me all the time, how does it feel? And I'm like, I mean, I'm cool. Right now, we get into that cool masculinity, being equitable minded, being even, not really showing too much, because again, I wasn't taught how to show those emotions and to repress those, and so sometimes that in and of itself puts us in a situation that we respond maybe differently than we should.
Yeah. So I have several thoughts and feelings and maybe a question. So the first, so I want to get back to, so let's not leave the, what do you think, what's the function, right? Every behavior is functional. So why do you think, right, there hasn't been space for Black men and boys to feel, right, to be taught with how to feel? So, but I want to, before I get to there, what you articulated was this awareness that sometimes when you are in an environment that feels hostile, right, or not affirming, where you have a heightened flight, fight, freeze, or fawn response, that you tend to be more guarded and defensive, and then people around you tend to respond in kind. So you're expecting the world not to be invited, then the world's like, you're being hostile, so we're going to be hostile to you, and it becomes this sort of co-created process, right? And how different it would be. So really, my question is, could you imagine, or right, we could hypothesize around this, is that some of the acting out, and I'm going to go directly to the community violence piece, that people perceive as about a lack of empathy or callousness or somehow inherent criminality. Could some of that be because about our need for sort of to feel full of ourselves, to feel grandiose, to be fully seen? And if you can't see me as the student in class having abundant potential, or as the rapper, or as the person with other kinds of possibilities, that maybe some of that is that natural need to be seen and recognized. And if you can't recognize me in healthy ways, then I'm going to show up in ways that you may see as pathological, but really I'm just trying to get a core need met. Just playing around with that. What do you think about that as a possibility?
Absolutely. And I think what happens is there's a cumulative effect that happens, right? And one of the things that we have to understand is that most of our Black youth, they have a very black-white sense of right and wrong, right? When I didn't do something, all the time I'm being accused of something, they know racism when they see it. And again, we're talking about the racial microaggressions and things like that. You didn't follow me in the store. I mean, her in the store, but you followed me. Those kind of things continue to happen. there's this sense of internal devaluation. And then unfortunately, sometimes, folks from our communities have experienced trauma and they perpetuate it, right? So we tell our young people, I've had my mom tell me, sit your little dumb self down, sit your little black behind down, and cursing and things like that, right? Well, for me, part of my pushback and resiliency, going back to the internal, I got good grades to show her I can't be the dummy, because I actually have gotten good grades. I gotten external validation to where you may be trying to, invalidate me. We also seek acceptance from our peers. Yeah. And so, Connor has a book that talks about, particularly for young Black males, right? For, there's only one group that can provide the kind of validation that they seek, and that is their peers. Mm-hmm. And it's important for parents and administrators in schools and other places to understand that they will show out and go against your words and your wishes, seeking the approval of their peers. Yeah. And I think that is, and I think that's it has some universality.
It's normal, adolescent,
right.
typical
but
behavior.
I think it's particularly pronounced. One of the theories that I use, African American male theory, and Bush says that it's something unique about being male and of African descent, right? And because of that, I seek the validation and valuation from those who look like me and relate to me and can understand me, right?
Well, I have a hypothesis about that. So yeah, right.
And so we sometimes show out for our peers, my boys, I'm gonna call my boy and show him I got this new car or whatever, right? One of the biggest validations I got was from my best friend. Yeah. We've been best friends over 45 years. And when he said, man, this is a big deal, I'm proud, you should be proud, I felt a sense of pride because my dude was proud, right? And so these things, like you say, it is somewhat universal, but it was something specific about him. The other group, being cisgender heterosexual, was my wife. Yeah. And so that validation, when you don't have a strong sense of internal self, you seek that external validation, and sometimes not in always the best way, especially in the social media era. Right, like, I'm gonna do this, and y'all record this. Watch me go over and, and so it's not always malicious in terms of intent, but nevertheless, a lot of our institutions say, well, you violated the rules regardless of your intent. And so I think that's what gets us into a little bit of situation, especially if we don't feel validated in that context anyway. Yeah. So I do believe that some of that is fulfilling. And I think, when we feel like I'm not that athlete, I'm not that educated person, I'm just an everyday, plain old non-celebrated person, it makes me more likely to be susceptible to community violence. And because internalized, I have a void, right? And so if I feel like, and that, that's what makes gangs and other groups like that attractive, is I feel like this violent group finds me valuable. I found family from them, right? And that's that influence that I can get. And it sometimes leads to that. But the other thing is, it's about saving face a lot of times. I'm not going to allow someone to disrespect me, because all I have is a little bit of sense of self because I don't have anything else. And so when someone disrespects me, I have to defend myself, and again, that's nothing new. Yeah. But what is new is the way that our young people is responding to it. Yeah. Like, again, we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, but people like Resmaa Menakem says, no, it's fight, flight, freeze, or annihilate. Yeah. The threat.
And we forget about Fawn, because she has a lot of followers. So yeah. So I don't want to leave this conversation with people. So I want to kind of take it to another level, because I don't want people to hear you saying that somehow there's this pathological expression of Black masculinity that is associated with community violence and grandiosity and attention seeking, because that's not it. Because all of those things are adaptive behaviors.
Correct.
That come from a world that is hostile. and parents who, right, there's lots of Joy DeGruy and segregation stress syndrome and other people have really done some research. And so part of the ways that Black women have parented Black boys was to prepare them for a world that they thought was going to be hostile. So toughening them up, making, right, sort of, or either toughening them up or infantilizing them, right? We do either two, right? We, love our sons and raise our daughters, or we, you're the man of the house, right? We can do either or, because things haven't been modeled. So, right, like when you break down the family, when you fracture it, when you put policies and procedures in, you kind of create, right, like systems where women are isolated and don't have extended networks and support, or men actively involved, and they are forced to sort of, and this I know will sound very gendered, but we do know that children need both male expression and female expression, however that shows up, to sort of balance them out. And so if you don't get it, if you don't know healthy ways of being grandiose, and again, that is a normal need in human development, read any child development book, you will find a way to make it happen. And so we're raising our children with lots of things that were survival strategies from, Reconstruction on, right? From slavery to Reconstruction on, where literally young Black men could be taken off the street for being too full of themselves. So how do I keep you humble and safe? And you need, as a young Black man, to feel full of yourself. And I'm feeling attention that way. And then I put you in schools and neighborhoods and communities who find your expression of grandiosity to be fearful and not welcomed. And so you have to either move out of those systems, find your own way, click up to find some validation that you matter, that your becoming matters, that your being matters, because you need that to survive for your whole mental health. So, right, I just want people to not see it as like some inherent, but we've created structures that have created this. It is not because we are structurally deficit, that it is our response to adversarial systems.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you look at a lot of the, the drug selling and things like that happens, it is, again, I talk about a friend of mine who said, he got out and he said, hey man, I'm trying to go straight. I'm trying to do this. I'm applying for these jobs. Would you be a reference for me? All this kind of other stuff. And then he came and said, look, I'm really trying, and it's not looking good. And if I'm unable to, be successful trying to go the legit route, as he called it, right? And what's interesting about that is he's like, a man is supposed to provide, right?
Yeah.
A man is supposed to protect, right? These Western constructs of masculinity and manhood. And if institutionally I'm not able to get an adequate job, and I'm not talking about just a temporary Mickey D's or something like that, or a temporary job, those are good starts. But he's saying, I want to be able to provide. And if I can't do that, I know a way to provide.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to that. And so sometimes intentionally, unintentionally, these systems, create barriers to, being self-fulfilled and being able to navigate in our society.
Yeah. And right. And it's, and then it becomes self-reinforcing, because we know how the brain works. Like once we get a trope or a stereotype in mind, we reinforce it, right? And so if I believe that if you have a criminal background, that means something about your character, not your behavior. And then I create policies, procedures, and practices because I believe that you have character deficits. And then you go and do something that reinforces my stereotype about your character deficit, like selling drugs, right? Like we think it's bad to sell drugs, but we we think it is now the common theory is if you're a drug user, because right, I wouldn't be selling drugs if people weren't buying drugs. But we don't think that the using of drugs is a character deficit. We think that the person who is selling it is the criminal, right? And
Right.
so we criminalize the behavior, and then it becomes self-reinforcing, because every time we see someone arrested for selling drugs who is Black and brown bodied, then we say that's what they do, even though we know that there are a whole bunch of drug sellers who are across the diaspora, but that's not our stereotype. That's not our trope. And right. And so again, it just becomes so limiting, you know.
And it's actually kind of ironic because I went and picked up a prescription at Walgreens about 20 minutes ago, right, or before this, and so there's a pharmacist in there, right? What is a pharmacist?
Yeah, yeah.
They're a drug seller, right? But again, they are a drug seller according to the systemic, societally acceptable way of doing things,
Yeah.
right? And so that's really the difference. And another irony is, the top 5 stressors for Black men, according to Powell, is money and finances is number 1.
Yeah.
Right. So again, if I can't get a job, if I can't, you're not a man, you can't provide. Right. 2 is race and racism.
Mm-hmm.
3 is jobs and career.
Yeah.
4 is relationships and family. And 5 is health and wellness. Yeah. And there's a lot of overlap and interplay into all of those things. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. And so then we have this notion of, I'm reading an article about manning up being, a really, really bad way of framing it, because man up, just do something different. And I like this quote here. It says, much too often, we African-American men advise each other to man up to personal problems. Handle your business, we say. This communicates 2 unhealthy messages. First, it says, I cannot help you. Yeah. Second, it recommends using individual problem-solving strategies without seeking the help of others, right? And it also fails to acknowledge the systemic norms. Again, when my friend said, I'm trying to do this, I didn't say man up. I said, let me know how I can help you so you're not in this alone, yeah. Right? Yeah. And so there's this interplay between, again, micro, macro, and meso level interventions that need to take place to perpetuate or offset, some of these mental health issues that are perpetuated amongst Black males.
Yeah. And right, even in the framing of them as mental health issues, because again, many of them are functional, normal, adaptive responses to a world that sometimes feels hostile and not safe and doesn't allow you to become, and feel like, so can we make sure, I want to talk about some solutions and strategies, but I do want to go back to this because I've heard it more than once when talking to Black men. What do you think is at the root of this question of can there be room for Black male expressions of emotions or to feel?
I think absolutely. But I think it comes from a solid sense of self. I have told my son, who just turned 20 on Monday, to feel free to be himself. And I have cried in front of him. I've hugged him, right? I did that in a way to try to show that it's natural, it's okay. But he's so stoic that, but I think absolutely we have to give them freedom to express themselves, right? And we have to do so in with a broad brushstroke. I've had people tell me, I could tell the excitement in your voice, or, were you angry, or what standard are you basing that on? Right. Yes. And so I think that's the other thing is, while I may want to give Black men freedom to express themselves, I think we also have to acknowledge that societally, there's this notion of there's a proper way to protest and all these other things. Right. But how can you tell me how to express how I'm feeling? Right. When it's me that's feeling it. And I understand that there has to be, everyone can't yell fire in a theater and those kind of things. I get that. I don't want people to misconstrue that I'm saying he said he'd be able to say anything. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is when we do have these reasonable, Martin Luther King said the riot is the voice of the unheard, right? You're not listening. So I'm saying it loudly and in a different way. And so I think that is I think what happens is when we're not allowed to express ourselves, right? And I don't even mean anger or frustration. I mean, sometimes just asking questions, right? I had previous employers say that I had coworkers afraid of me, right? And I'm like, afraid? I'm not, and again, I'm younger and I'm thinking I've never threatened anybody or whatever. But if you asking questions, you're not just co-signing, you're not rubber stamping, you're not just going along, that is deemed a threat. So I think it's interesting why that we want Black men to be able to express themselves. I think that's part of true freedom, but we also have to address, again, the systemic and bureaucratic limitations in which you can express yourself and the way you do it.
Yeah. And I think what you suggested is it starts early, and some of it, one of the core strategies to address community violence is improving relationships between caregivers and their children. And it's not necessarily about teaching parents, but it's just making room for parents to be able to be fully present, to be good parents, to lean in, to have support. And if I'm a overwhelmed, working 2 jobs, under-supported person, trying to raise a kid and family without the kind of village, it is hard to make room for my children's expression of emotions. It's hard for me to make room to share my emotions because I'm maybe on autopilot. And then and I'm imagining unfortunately, because so many of our families have been fragmented statistically, right? They're more vulnerable now than any time during our American experience, which is really, right, painful to think that even during slavery and Reconstruction or whatever, our families were much more whole. But right. And so, I think when fathers come into those spaces, they are so sacred, right? Because maybe it's only a weekend or a visitation or whatever. So do you use that space to be vulnerable and to share what the stressors are, And I think that just sort of promotes more camouflage. And it's not like we don't feel, it's just that without the adequate village, right? When you talked about those top 5 stressors, without some of those stressors being eradicated, it's hard to make room for emotional expressions, right? Because vulnerability requires time and energy and not being in survival mode. And when you're constantly in the habit of survival and wondering about where the next predator is, and I know you talk about systems being predators, and then we pass it down to our kids.
Absolutely. And making room, right, is again, these gender tropes and things that we have, because one of the things that I learned from my students at the various schools that I've worked at, I had a student one time tell me, I was her mentor from this program, and I gave her my cell number. I said, hey, if you need anything, I was excited. I said, if you need anything, text me or call me. And she said, I'm not going to call you.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay. I'm thinking I got bad breath or something, But she said, I'm grown and it's my pride. So there's this notion that adulthood, and I can't remember where I read this, but particularly in low income communities, you being self-sufficient is an indicator of you being an adult. You're on your grown man, you and your grown woman. I don't need anybody for anything, and so this self-sufficiency we shut off. And so I think it's not just giving us permission, but understanding the value and the benefit of doing so, right? Yeah. But I was reading this article, and 2 men, they were friends, they walked all the time. One of them was going through a divorce and some other problems. The other one was having some financial problems, but they talked about sports. They talked about their cars. They talked about these surface level things. And I think part of it is I need to show that whatever it is I'm going through, and they knew about these things with each other, but I'm still on my grown man. I'm still independent. I still don't have to ask anybody for anything. And I am trying to recover from that. I struggle asking people for anything, right? Because, you know, uh, again, it's this indicator that you're mature and you're responsible and you don't need anyone for anything. But it takes away from this village concept that we're supposed to have, right? And so one of the most meaningful things that happened to me in the last year was my dissertation chair advisor said, if you need anything, if you get stuck, and a lot of people get stuck, call me. Karen, I embarrassingly will tell you in this audience that I just started crying. I've never had someone who wasn't in my circle tell me, if you need something to help you achieve something that's so important to you, call me, reach out to me. No strings attached. It was scary because it's not the norm. And again, I don't think that's necessarily the Black community. I think it's community at large, but I think it's exacerbated when you're from a smaller marginalized community and you see what's going on with each other, right? And then we want to hold, we want our kids to have Christmas gifts and things like everyone else. And it's a stress, it's a struggle to produce when you're dealing with systemic racism, where you're not getting the promotions and opportunities that others are getting. So it's difficult.
Right. That was right. Touching and heartbreaking. And when we started this conversation, I was saying, what do you wish we could offer to help improve the lives of young Black men, improve their mental health, improve their wellness, and that making sure that imagine a world where every Black young male from early childhood to adulthood, to particularly in the way to young adulthood, had someone who said, I am here for you unconditionally, no strings attached. I'm going to teach and model and show you that you can ask for help. I'm going to be journeying with you. And that is not like a drive-by mentoring, all right? Because the research around mentoring is mixed, right? Because if you don't give me the kind of relational model, right, that is this unconditional positive regard that I am with you and I'm showing you, and really you can reach out, then people who need a lot are going to feel like that mentoring was insufficient. And so how do we offer that more broadly and deeply? Actually, my other question is, make sure, because you say this, other recommendations about what supports you would like to make sure exist.
Your first point, I think is absolutely, again, we talked about this previously. Who is the person that your young people would contact?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's important. And ironically, that is what I built at Mizzou, was it wasn't intended to be a mentoring, it was intended to be a support. But what happened was the program created a brotherhood within itself. And myself and the co-advisor, we provided mentoring and support, but they provided mentoring and support for one another as well. Right. And so something like that, I think, is essential, to the point where now some of them are saying, I want to create this in my job. Mm-hmm. So for new people come in, and so they've taken this from freshman year of college to, I want this in my job. Mm-hmm. So that says that it works. And again, I told them, don't drink and drive. Call me. I'll come and get you. Right now in the morning when you're sober, I'm gonna talk bad to you. Right. But I am going to commend you.
With you. Yeah.
But I am going to commend you for not making a decision to drive and things like that. And that's that, again, unconditional resolve. Yeah. Right. I'm not going to look down on you. I'm not going to do that. So I think that's one solution. That I think we need in our youth programs. And again, I think Boys and Girls Club does a good job of that. I know Dream does a good job of that. I'd like to see more of that in our K through 12, and not be so quick to suspend, right? Develop more of the unconditional resolve. And again, that's not letting them go and get and do anything, but saying, hey, look, I think there's potential in you. I believe in you, and I need you to walk in, fulfill that potential, right? Instead of just quickly dismissing. I think there needs to be services that are youth led. Again, I seen the power of their mentoring one another was way more powerful. During my interviews, I learned stuff that went on amongst the group that we had no clue about, right? Yeah, we almost fight at that event. What? Right? But they resolved it internally because we created a structure to say, you can do some things on your own, but we're here to support you no matter what. And that kind of thing. And then in terms of the services, they need to be culturally responsive. I think a lot of times our young people are going through things that they're not sharing because they don't have the language yet, right? And so again, internal invalidation, feeling like there's a sense of worthlessness because you've heard that from somewhere else, right? And then I think we need to create more of a model to where it's parents, schools, community leaders, and organizations and others all kind of on the same wavelength of real village model, and not just there's a great youth program over here, and these cops are good and some not so much, and this teacher is great, but how do we bring all of it together so it kind of all balances out, right? And then the other thing is, I think some of our institutions need to look at the different models, right? Like we say go to counseling, okay, but is the first of all, is there a therapist that looks like me? We talked about that before. And so if I do find one, are they in my provider's network? Because if they're not, then that means I have to pay this $150, $200 out of pocket and hope that my Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever reimburses me in a timely manner because Christmas is coming up, right? And so there's those systemic things as well. And then the last thing is understanding the harm that the system has and continues to cause, albeit sometimes unintentionally, right? And we talked earlier about the distrust of the system based on historical narratives. And so I think that's understanding what some of that history is. I was shocked to learn some of the history of the social work profession. Oh, yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. And for example, the disproportionalities and the disparities amongst who's being taken out of the homes and put into foster care, Black boys in Illinois, right? It's a huge disparity, right? And these are the folks who are supposed to be the good folks. So again, I think critiquing and looking through a social justice lens and in a lot of what we're doing, how is this empowering? How is this moving me me and my agency organization out of the way and allowing clients to flourish and be empowered and take control of their lives and their trajectory?
Yeah. So, right, I feel like we're at the end. I want to plug, because one of the things that you said was you would love for schools to be more purposeful with this sort of inclusive village that is trauma informed and collaborative and peer support. And I do believe that Champaign Schools, that's piloting the LIFT program, is that model. Woohoo! They really are striving to be that real intentional inclusive model where there is wraparound and after school and cohorts and a fully integrated model. So I am super excited to see how that unfolds. And I'm hoping that, the schools and the community will continue to support them in their efforts to be that, demonstration of what could be possible and probable, right? Like what could work. Absolutely. So we have like one more minute. Clearly this is a conversation that could go on, because I don't think most people know the history of social work and how it is in parallel with the development of the policing law enforcement. Right. Ran in parallel. But are there closing words that you have around how this conversation around Black men and mental health and community violence, how we should be thinking or framing, and what you would recommend or offer?
Yeah, I think there's no such thing as over communication, right? Mm-hmm. Find out, again, based off what I learned from you and others, what happened to you that causes you to have this response. Right. Because again, I know from my experience growing up with people who carry guns and stuff, people don't wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I think I'm going to shoot somebody today. Right. That doesn't happen but what happened in the course of that day that took you to that level, or have you feeling like, you know, the risk is worth maybe possibly ending someone's life for something that happened? And again, I recommend Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hand, where I learned for the first time, I heard someone help me understand why someone may shoot because they stepped on your Air Jordans. I was like, why? And it was just saying, because if my Air Jordans represents my persona, and this is my point of pride, this is people compliment my shoes because it's kind of all I have, right? And then you step on all I have. It's not a justification, but at least says, okay, that I see the flawed logic there, right? And so again,
flawed heartbreak, because it's not up here, that's the in here.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an embodiment.
You know, and not the conscious thinking, but the logic in terms of at least it makes sense in a twisted sense is what I'm saying, of the logic, not necessarily the person, but someone, the observer, and just trying to understand, how can I support this person, and being proactive, having conversation. Hey, how are you feeling today? You know, how's it going? You know, how can I help you? You know, I have so I tell the audience, if you ever see me and I just started talking to you, I sometimes sense that something's wrong with someone. And I just want you to know, hey, I might not have the money or whatever, but I can give you a hug and I can let you know somebody cares, right? I can pray for you. And what I can do, will do. So that's the other thing, is we need to have concrete solutions. You know, let's get free hug t-shirts sometime and stand out and just say, hey, look, I know you don't have the Christmas money or whatever, but you know, sometimes somehow it's going to work out. You know, it's just a positive vibe sometimes, because there's so much going on in the world amongst all communities that I think it becomes overwhelming to a lot of marginalized communities. So
I love your articulation. So I know that there are lots of brilliance out there and a lot of great books, but we have Dr. Stevens, who, you know, has lived experience, who's walked the walk, who believes and loves Black men and boys and all folks, right? And so
all folks.
It has been such a pleasure to have this conversation. And you know, I'm going to do my final plug. TRI has a COVID messaging campaign, and our message around COVID is spread love, not COVID. So I like love what you articulated is maybe we need to also add spread love and care, not COVID, right? Because right in our village, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. So thank you so much. Stay safe and wise, and we look forward to the books and articles and all of the relevant things that will help guide us. So
absolutely. And thank you so very much, Karen, for the work that you're doing in this community. It's needed, it's beneficial, it's impactful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, be well.
Be well.